You might have been worried had he sung Sweet Hour of Prayer. I want you to close your eyes for a second, or keep them open if you imagine things better that way. But I want you to imagine a day in America where a foreign country has taken us over. They occupy our land. They're dragging some of us off. Maybe they're dragging off our young ones, our best and our brightest, the kids that would get good scores on their ACT. I think of kids in this congregation, we got a lot of good young men. Dragging them off. And this foreign power is dragging them off to places where, for lack of a better word, they're concentration camps. They're re-education facilities. They detain and they brainwash and they really encourage these young people to learn the ways of the enemy, value things that the enemy values. There was a movie back when I was a teenager, sometime about in the mid-1980s, called Red Dawn. Some of you are shaking your head, you know what I'm talking about. Where Cuba and the former Soviet Union come together and take over basically Middle America. I think it was everything west of the Mississippi and east of the Rockies. So this area would have been included in that. And I thought back in 1980 it was pretty far-fetched. That there was no way that another power could come in here and do that to us. We're America. But folks, the America I live in 2012, I don't have that much confidence as I did as a teenager back in the 1980s. We're pretty divided as a nation. We're pretty splintered already. And it wouldn't take as much as it would have 30 years ago to drive a wedge between us, I don't think. Well, that's kind of what's happened to the Jews. They're in captivity to the Babylonians. The Jewish leaders, the young ones, the best and the brightest, have been taken away to be retrained in Babylonian ways and values. These Jewish men, these best and brightest, were told, now if you play ball with us, if you sell out, you go back and teach the other Jews the Babylonian ways and values, you basically be our puppet. We'll give you a little bit of power. The real test for these men was when the Babylonian way pressed hard against the Jewish way, or God's way. Now the Babylonians were very diplomatic about their worship. The Babylonians did not care if the Jews worshipped God, Jehovah, as long as they worshipped their gods too. Many of these gods were golden idols. And I imagine, and this is speculation on my part, I imagine a lot of Jewish leaders caved, thinking, it'll be okay. God will understand. I think there's some Christians that kind of take that philosophy with God today. God, you're not always the most important thing in my life, but I think you understand. If I put something above you every once in a while. After all these horrible things were happening to people who refused to go along with the Babylonians, including being thrown in a furnace. And into this walked 3 Jewish men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And this is where we pick up the story in Daniel 3. We're going to start partway through verse 12 and right now read through verse 18. Stay with me. It's lengthy. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold that you have set up. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up?" Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, all kinds of music, if you are ready, fall down and worship the image I've made. Very good. But if you do not worship it, you'll be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and He will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if He does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you've set up. I remember hearing this story when I was a kid, and to me it was one of the most powerful stories of the Old Testament. A story that shapes you deep down in your soul, because it is a story that is in my face what I ought to be. Church family, I desire the faith of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because that kind of faith is going to stand any test or any trial. First thing I want you to notice is that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are not in despair. When it comes to a test or a trial in our life, James describes them as both. There are really three ways, basically, and there may be a few more, but basically there are three ways that we can handle it. And one is despair. Oh, woe is me. Life is so unfair. I got to tell you, church family, I've never seen anyone overcome a spiritual test or a trial in my life with that being their strategy. Oh, woe is me. Life is so unfair. Oh, woe is me is not a good spiritual strategy when you're talking about overcoming something. Some people are complacent. At least they are outwardly complacent. They don't seem to care. Then there is giving it to God. Trusting God. And that's what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did. Another thing they didn't do is they didn't blame God for the situation they were in. They didn't blame God for their captivity. They didn't blame God that the Babylonians had overrun the Jews. They didn't blame God. They didn't try to bargain with God. They didn't say, now Lord, if you'll get us out of this one, we'll do whatever you want. How many of you done that? Lord, if you get me out of this one, then I'll be your man. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego simply say, paraphrasing, King Nebuchadnezzar, we're not worshiping your God. Furnace or not, dead or alive, God's going to take care of us. Church family, nothing on earth, nothing Satan can throw at you, and no mess that you can get yourself in can overcome that kind of faith. Sometimes in life, there may be, I don't know, it probably depends on the person's walk in their life, but I'm telling you, there's already been one or two times in my life. I'm 47 years old. Some of you more experienced members, there's probably been more than that in yours. But young people, listen to me. There's going to be one or two or three times in your life that you're going to be tested big time, to the max, wondering if God's going to keep that promise that He's not going to put more on you than you can bear. Desperate times. We have to trust God no matter what the circumstance, no matter what the cost, no matter what the result, and simply trust God because God is God. Well, that's pretty simple, isn't it? God is God. We, church family, are defined as followers of Jesus Christ, as Christians, not by the circumstances of life that look like a day at the beach, but by the circumstances in life that look like the door of a furnace. God is God. Sometimes we treat God the way some people would treat marriage. Well, I love you as long as you're good looking or beautiful, and as long as the finances are good, and long as things are better and not worse. Sometimes that's our attitude toward God as well. When it's a day at the beach, we're there. When it's a door of the furnace, it's something else. You know, that kind of attitude is not going to build a good marriage, and it is not going to be or build a good relationship with God either. God is God. Verses 19 through 30. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. His attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers that took Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that were tied up and thrown into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, Your Majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed. And the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out. Come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. And the prefect, the governor, and the royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was the hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent His angel and rescued His servants. They trusted Him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or any language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble. For no other God can save in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. What can total, sold out, trusting God do? It can change the mind of kings. It can change the course of history. Maybe the most important thing it can do is give you the ability to face the furnaces of life. Knowing you're not alone because God is God. I can think of 2 ways to describe the faith of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The first faith is a faith that says that God is in control. A faith that does not let our current situation dictate our level of trust or faith. Our ultimate fate rests squarely in the grace of God. Not in our government, not in our boss at work, not in some bill collector who's calling you on the phone and leaving nasty messages on your answer machine. Our ultimate fate rests in the grace of God. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego knew their faith was not going to be decided by an earthly king or anything else on earth for that matter, but by the grace of God.